Maverick's spurs struck sparks against the courthouse steps as he burst through the heavy oak doors. His leather satchel clutched tight against his chest. The auctioneer's gavel was already raised, poised to strike the final blow that would seal Cordelia's fate forever. Wait. His voice cracked like thunder across the packed courtroom, but the gavel fell with a decisive thud. "Sold to Mr. Beaumont for $5,000, the auctioneer declared, his words cutting through Maverick's heart like a rusty blade. Cordelia stood frozen at the defendant's table, her emerald eyes wide with disbelief as the reality crashed over her. Her father's debts had finally claimed everything: the ranch, the cattle, even her freedom through an arranged marriage to the highest bidder. Augustus Beaumont, a rail baron twice her age, with hands like raw meat and breath that reeked of whiskey and cruelty, stepped forward with a predatory smile. "No," Maverick breathed, pushing through the crowd of onlookers who had gathered like vultures to witness the spectacle. His boots thundered against the wooden floor as he fought his way toward the front. But Sheriff Hawkins blocked his path with an outstretched arm. "It's done, boy. Legal and binding." Cordelia's knees buckled as Beaumont approached her, his thick fingers reaching for her chin. She jerked away, fire blazing in her eyes despite the tears that threatened to spill. "Don't you dare touch me," she hissed, backing against the wall like a cornered wildcat. Maverick's hand instinctively dropped to his holster, but the sheriff's warning glare reminded him that drawing iron in a courthouse would only make things worse. He watched helplessly as Beaumont's lawyer produced a marriage contract, the ink still wet from where Cordelia's trembling father had signed away his daughter's life to pay his gambling debts. "The ceremony will take place tomorrow at dawn," Beaumont announced to the room, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Mrs. Beaumont and I will be departing immediately after for my estate in San Francisco." The words hit Maverick like a physical blow. Tomorrow, he had less than 24 hours to figure out how to save the woman who had stolen his heart. During those stolen summer evenings by the creek, when they'd planned a future together under stars that now seemed impossibly distant. As the crowd began to disperse, Cordelia caught his eye across the room. The look she gave him was filled with such desperate longing and unspoken love that it nearly brought him to his knees. Her lips formed 3 silent words: "Find another way." Beaumont's meaty hand clamped down on her shoulder, and she flinched, as if struck. "Come along, my dear. We have wedding preparations to discuss." His laugh was like the sound of bones breaking. Maverick watched them leave, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. The courthouse emptied around him, until only he and the clerk remained, surrounded by the echoes of shattered dreams and the musty smell of legal documents that had just destroyed 2 lives. Outside, thunder rumbled across the prairie sky, matching the storm building in his chest. He had money now, the cattle drive to Kansas, had paid well, but it had arrived too late. Or had it? The storm broke just as Maverick reached the Dusty Rose Saloon, rain hammering the wooden sidewalks like bullets. Inside, the usual crowd of cowboys, merchants, and drifters huddled around tables thick with cigar smoke and broken dreams. But Maverick's attention fixed on the figure hunched over the far corner, table Jeremiah Whitmore. Cordelia's father drowning his guilt in rot-gut whiskey. "You son of a bitch," Maverick snarled, crossing the room in 3 long strides. His fist connected with Jeremiah's jaw before the older man could even look up, sending him sprawling across the sawdust-covered floor. The saloon fell silent, except for the rain pounding the roof. Jeremiah wiped blood from his split lip, his rheumy eyes struggling to focus. "Maverick, I had no choice. The debts. You had choices." Maverick hauled him up by his shirt collar, pressing him against the wall. "You could have come to me. You knew I'd been saving money, knew I loved her." $5,000, Jeremiah wheezed. "Where would a cowpoke like you get that kind of money?" Maverick's grip tightened. "I've got it now. Every damn penny from the Kansas run, plus what I've been saving for 3 years to buy my own spread." He shook the broken man like a rag doll. "But you couldn't wait 1 more day, could you?" "Couldn't. Send word that the auction was happening?" "Beaumont threatened to foreclose immediately if I didn't sign." Jeremiah's voice cracked. "Said he'd make sure Cordelia ended up in a whorehouse instead of his mansion." At least this way she'll have comfort, security. The second punch dropped Jeremiah like a sack of grain. Oh, this time he didn't get up. Security? Maverick's voice was deadly quiet. You've sold your daughter to a man who's buried 3 wives. Already, half the territory knows what happened to those women. Old Pete, the bartender, leaned across the bar. Easy there, son. Jeremiah's been drinking himself to death since he signed those papers. Man knows what he's done. Maverick turned away from the pathetic figure on the floor, his mind racing. There had to be some legal loophole, some technicality. Pete, who's the smartest lawyer in town? That'd be Miss Penelope Hartwell. Runs the legal office above the mercantile. But she's been trying to get women the right to own property, challenge these kinds of contracts. Beaumont's got most of the other lawyers in his pocket. Thunder crashed. Overhead, as Maverick made his decision, he pulled out his money roll, every dollar he'd earned, saved, and dreamed of using to build a life with Cordelia. Take this to Miss Hartwell. Tell her I need every legal trick she knows to stop a forced marriage, if it can't be stopped legal-like. Maverick's hand dropped to his gun again, his fingers caressing the worn leather of his holster. Then, I'll stop it another way. Hey. The saloon door slammed behind him as he stepped back into the storm. Lightning illuminated the muddy street, and in the distance, could see the lights of Beaumont's hotel suite, where Cordelia was trapped. Probably planning her escape or preparing for the worst night of her life. He had until dawn to save her. The law might have failed them both, but Maverick knew there were older laws on the frontier laws, written in gunpowder and desperate love. The grandfather clock in Miss Hartwell's office chimed. Midnight, as she spread the marriage contract across. Her desk, her sharp eyes scanning every line by lamplight. Maverick paced behind her like a caged wolf, his boots wearing a groove in the Persian rug. There, she said suddenly, her fingers stabbing at a paragraph near the bottom. Beaumont's. Lawyer made an error. The contract states the marriage must be consummated within 48 hours of signing to be legally binding. But it also requires the bride's father to be present as witness. Maverick stopped pacing. Jeremiah will be there, not if he's in jail. Miss Hartwell's smile was sharp as a blade. I've been documenting Beaumont's illegal business practices for months. If we can prove Jeremiah signed under duress, which he didn't, get him arrested for public intoxication before dawn, contract becomes void. But Beaumont won't just let her go. He'll find another way. Then we make sure she's not there. To be found? Miss Hartwell stood, gathering papers into her leather satchel. I know a judge in the next county who owes me a favor. If we can get Cordelia out of town before dawn, I can file an injunction to stop any future contracts. Maverick's heart hammered against his ribs. She's locked in Beaumont's hotel suite. 3 floors up, guards at the door, then we'll need a distraction. Miss Hartwell moved to her window, pointing across the street to where the hotel loomed against the stormy sky. The annual Founders' Day fireworks are stored in the shed behind the building. If someone were to accidentally set them off, ... that's not an accident. That's arson. That's love, Mr. Maverick. The question is how far you're willing to go for it. 20 minutes later, Maverick crouched behind the hotel's woodshed, his hands shaking as he struck match after match in the driving rain. Finally, a spark caught the fuse he'd jerry-rigged to the fireworks cache. He had maybe 3 minutes before. All hell broke loose. He scaled the hotel's back wall like a man possessed, using rain gutters and window ledges to reach the 3rd floor. Through Cordelia's window, he could see her silhouette pacing back and forth, still wearing the blue dress from the courthouse, but now with her hair loose around her shoulders like spun gold. The first firework exploded just as his knuckles touched the glass. Cordelia spun around, her eyes widening as she saw his face pressed against the window. She rushed to unlock the latch, throwing it open as Roman candles lit up the night sky behind him. Maverick, what did you know time to explain? He pulled her into his arms, feeling her warm body tremble against his chest. Can you climb? In this dress? Then we tear it. His hands found the fabric at her knees, ripping away enough material to free her legs. The sound of shouting voices and running feet echoed from the street below as the entire town rushed to see the fireworks display. Cordelia grabbed his face in her hands, her eyes blazing with fierce determination. If we're caught, we won't be. He kissed her hard, tasting desperation and hope on her lips. I've got horses waiting and a lawyer with a plan, but we have to move now. Another explosion painted the sky red as they climbed through the window. Together, the horses' hooves thundered across the muddy prairie as dawn broke gray and cold over the horizon. Maverick kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see Beaumont's men in pursuit. But the storm had washed out most of the roads. They had maybe an hour's head start before the rail baron discovered his bride had vanished in the night. Cordelia rode beside him with the skill of a woman born to the saddle, her torn dress streaming behind her like a battle flag. Her face was flushed with exhilaration and terror, but her eyes never left his as they raced toward the county line. "Where are we going?" she called over the wind. "Judge Morrison's place in Cedar Falls. Miss Hartwell says he'll marry us without questions." Asked, "And if Beaumont follows us?" Maverick's hand dropped to his gun. "Then he'll find us legally bound and ready to fight." They crested a hill and saw the town spread out below them like a collection of dollhouses. Smoke rose from chimneys as families, prepared for another day, unaware that two desperate lovers were racing against time and the law itself, as they rode down Main Street. Heads turned to stare at the muddy, disheveled couple. Maverick pulled up in front of a white clapboard house with Judge Morrison painted on a wooden sign. Before he could dismount, the front door opened. "Miss Hartwell sent word you'd be coming," Judge Morrison said. His weathered face creased. With amusement, she also sent this. He held up an official-looking document, temporary restraining order against one Augustus Beaumont, preventing him from pursuing, contacting, or harassing one Miss Cordelia Whitmore pending a full legal review of the marriage contract. Cordelia slid from her horse, her legs nearly buckling with relief. I mean, you're free to make your own choices, young lady? And if that choice is to marry this cowboy, I can perform the ceremony right now." They stood facing each other in the judge's parlor, still muddy and breathless from their wild ride. Cordelia's dress was torn and stained, her hair hanging in tangles, but Maverick had never seen anything more beautiful in his life. "Are you sure?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Beaumont won't forgive or forget. I've been sure since the first time you kissed me by the creek," she whispered. "I'd rather spend one day as your wife than a lifetime as his prisoner." The ceremony was simple. No flowers, no music, no guests except for the judge's wife as witness. But when Judge Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. "Where will you go?" the judge asked, as they prepared to leave. North, Maverick said. "I've got a cousin in Montana who runs cattle. We can start fresh there." As they mounted their horses, a rider appeared on the horizon, Sheriff Hawkins, pushing his horse hard. Maverick's hand moved to his gun, but the sheriff held up his hand in a peaceful gesture. "Easy there, son. I'm not here to arrest anybody." He pulled alongside them, his badge glinting in the morning sun. "Beaumont's raising holy hell back in town, but Miss Hartwell's got him tied up in legal knots. Seems his marriage contract wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. What about Jeremiah, sleeping off his drunk in my jail? Just like the lady lawyer planned. Will be released this afternoon with a warning about public intoxication." Relief flooded through Maverick, but he kept his guard up. And Beaumont. That's the interesting part. Turns out the railroad company's been investigating him for fraud. Miss Hartwell's evidence was the final nail in his coffin. He'll be too busy fighting federal charges to worry about one runaway bride. 3 months later, Maverick stood on the porch of their small cabin in the Montana Territory, watching Cordelia tend to her vegetable garden in the golden afternoon light. The mountains rose behind her like purple guardians, and the valley stretched out green and peaceful as far as the eye could see. She looked up from her tomatoes and caught him staring, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "What are you thinking about, husband? Just remembering that night at the hotel? Sometimes I can't believe we made it out." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "Sometimes I dream we didn't. That I wake up and I'm still trapped in that room waiting for Beaumont too." She shuddered. And Maverick was across the yard in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. "That life's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now. We're safe, I know. It's just When I think about how close we came to losing everything, a rider appeared on the distant trail, kicking up dust as he approached their property. Maverick instinctively stepped in front of Cordelia, his hand moving toward his gun, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's just the mail rider," she said, recognizing the Postal Service uniform. The young man dismounted, tipping his hat. "To Cordelia, Mrs. Maverick, got a letter for you from Texas. Looks official." Cordelia's hands trembled as she opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the contents. Slowly, a smile spread across her face. "It's from Miss Hartwell. Beaumont was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison." And she looked up at Maverick, tears of joy shining in her eyes. "The railroad seized all his assets to compensate his victims. She's managed to recover enough money to pay off father's debts and save the ranch." "The ranch?" Maverick felt his heart stop. "I mean, we could go home." She folded the letter carefully, her expression thoughtful. "Father's been sober for 2 months now. He's been working the land himself, trying to make amends. Miss Hartwell says he asks about me every day." Maverick studied her face, seeing the longing there. Montana was beautiful, and his cousin had been generous with work and land, but it wasn't home. "Not really. Do you want to go back?" "Only if you do. This is our life now, whatever we choose to make it." That evening, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains red and gold. Cordelia leaned against his shoulder, her hand resting on her still flat belly where their first child was just beginning to grow, a secret she'd been saving to share until the time was right. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," she murmured, "about going home, and maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's just being with the person you love, no matter where that is." Maverick kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair that still carried hints of the wildflowers she'd woven into it that morning. "So we stay for now?" "What?" "But maybe, maybe, someday we could visit. Show our children where their parents' love story began? Our children?" He pulled back to look at her, and the secret smile on her face told him everything he needed to know. "In about 7 months, you're going to be a father." The stars were coming out one by one, scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds. On black velvet, somewhere far to the south, the town where they'd met and fallen in love continued its quiet existence. Here in their mountain valley, Mr. and Mrs. Maverick were writing the next chapter of their story. 2 years later, little Colton Maverick took his first steps across the cabin floor, stumbling into his father's outstretched arms while Cordelia watched from her rocking chair, cradling their newborn daughter, Violet. The cabin had grown too. Maverick had added 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen, transforming their simple shelter into a real home. "He's got your stubborn streak." Cordelia laughed as Colton immediately tried to walk back to her, determined to master this new skill on his own terms. "In your green eyes," Maverick replied, scooping up his son. "Poor kid doesn't stand a chance." A knock at the door interrupted their domestic bliss. Maverick's hand instinctively moved toward. His gun-old habits died hard but relaxed when he saw Miss Hartwell's familiar figure through the window. "Penelope," Cordelia exclaimed, carefully rising with the baby. "What brings you all the way to Montana?" The lawyer looked older, her dark hair now streaked with silver, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Business and pleasure," she said, accepting Cordelia's embrace. "I've been traveling the territory setting up legal aid offices for women. But I also have news about home." They gathered around the kitchen table while Cordelia put coffee on to boil. Miss Hartwell produced a thick envelope from her traveling bag. "Your father," she began, addressing Cordelia directly, "has turned the ranch into one of the most profitable cattle operations in 3 counties. He's been sober for over 2 years now, and he's saved every penny he could to pay you back." "Pay me back?" "For the wedding you never had, the home you lost, the future that was stolen from you." Miss Hartwell's voice was gentle. "He's transferred deed to half the ranch to you, Cordelia. Says it's the least he can do to make amends." Maverick and Cordelia exchanged glances. They'd built a good life in Montana, but the ranch in Texas represented more than land. It was family, legacy, the place where their love had taken root. "There's more," Miss Hartwell continued. "The town's grown since you left, like they're building a new school and need teachers. The bank is looking for honest men to help with the cattle loans. And... She smiled at baby Violet. Your father is desperate to meet his grandchildren. That night, after Miss Hartwell had been settled in the guest room and the children were asleep, Maverick and Cordelia walked hand in hand through their property. The Montana mountains stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, beautiful and eternal. What are you thinking? Cordelia asked. I'm thinking about that scared cowboy who climbed through your window 3 years ago. Thought he was saving you, but maybe you were saving him instead. We saved each other. She stopped walking, turning to face him in the moonlight. The question is, where do we go from here? Wherever you want to go. You could stay here, build a cattle empire in the mountains. Or we could go back to Texas, help your father run the ranch, be close to family. Or we could do both. Cordelia's eyes sparkled with an idea. Spend summers here in Montana, winters in Texas. Let the children know both places, both parts of their heritage. Maverick pulled her close, marveling again at her wisdom. You realize that means we'd be travelers most of our lives? Always packing up, moving between worlds? I've been thinking about that too. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm. Home isn't the ranch in Texas or this cabin in Montana. Home is right here in your arms, with our children sleeping safely nearby. Everything else is just geography. As if summoned by their words, Colton's cry echoed from the cabin, followed by Violet's hungry wail. They hurried back toward the warm glow of their windows, ready to tend to their children and plan for a future that would span 2 states and all the miles between. Behind them, Montana wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of coming autumn and the promise of new adventures ahead. 5 years after their midnight escape, Maverick helped Cordelia down from the wagon as their family arrived at the familiar gates of the Whitmore Ranch. Colton, now 7, pressed his face against the wagon sides to get a better look, while 4-year-old Violet clutched her rag doll and stared wide-eyed at the sprawling house where her mother had grown up. It's bigger than I remembered, Cordelia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The front door burst open, and Jeremiah Whitmore emerged, clean-shaven, clear-eyed, and 20 pounds heavier than when they'd last seen him. His transformation was so complete that Maverick barely recognized the broken man from the saloon. Cordy? Jeremiah's voice cracked as he stopped at the edge of the porch, as if afraid to come closer. Is it really you? Cordelia moved toward him slowly, years of hurt and forgiveness warring in her expression. Hello, Father. The reunion was tentative at first. Too many wounds, too much time lost. But when Colton broke free from Maverick's grip and ran straight to his grandfather, demanding to see the horses, the ice began to thaw. He looks just like you did at that age, Jeremiah told Cordelia as they watched the boy explore the barn, fearless and curious about everything. And she has your artistic eye, Cordelia replied, nodding toward Violet, who was sketching the ranch house with a piece of charcoal. On the back of an envelope, over the following days, the family settled into a rhythm. Maverick worked alongside the ranch hands, his years of experience evident in every movement. Cordelia helped with the household management and began teaching at the new schoolhouse in town. The children thrived in the wide-open spaces, making friends with the neighbor kids and learning to ride like proper Texans. One evening, as the family gathered on the porch for supper, Miss Hartwell arrived with a special guest, Judge Morrison, who had traveled from Cedar Falls to see how the young couple was faring. I perform a lot of marriages, the elderly judge said, watching Maverick and Cordelia work together to serve the meal while keeping the children in line. But I can count on one hand the ones that were truly meant to last. You to give an old romantic hope for the institution. After dinner, Jeremiah pulled Maverick aside for a private conversation by the creek where the young man had first courted his daughter. I owe you an apology, the older man began. In a debt I can never fully repay. You don't owe me anything. Owe you everything. My daughter's happiness, my grandchildren's laughter, even my own sobriety. Watching you fight for her showed me what real love looks like. It shamed me into becoming the man I should have been all along. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the water flow over the stones and the distant sound of children's laughter from the house. There's something else, Jeremiah continued. Why do officially make you a partner in the ranch? Equal. Shares your name on all the papers. It's what Cordelia's mother would have wanted. That night, as Maverick and Cordelia tucked their children into the same bedroom where she had dreamed of escape years earlier, she turned to him with tears in her eyes. When I was trapped in that hotel room, waiting for dawn and dreading what it would bring, I never imagined this. A real family, a home where my children can grow up safe. A husband who still looks at me like I'm the most beautiful woman in the world. You are, he said simply, pulling her into his arms. Every day. You are? Outside their window, the Texas sky stretched endless and star-filled, holding all their yesterdays and tomorrows. The ranch would prosper under their joint leadership. Their children would grow strong and free, and every sunset would remind them of the night a desperate cowboy climbed through a window to save the woman he loved in the years to come. Would tell their grandchildren the story of the auction that changed everything. The midnight ride through the storm, and the love that proved stronger than law or money or fear. But tonight, they simply held each other in the darkness, grateful for every moment that had led them home. The cowboy had arrived too late to stop the auction, but just in time to start the greatest adventure of his life.